Google asks open-ended questions for one specific reason. They want to see how you handle complexity. Can you take a messy problem, structure it clearly, come up with a recommendation that's both creative and grounded in reality? Most candidates fail by going too far in one direction. Some get so practical, they are boring, solid framework, zero creative insight. Others get so creative, they lose credibility. Brilliant idea, no grounding in what the technology can actually deliver or what works at scale. Today, I'm showing you how to bridge both. This is where senior PM thinking shows up. Hi, I'm Muthu. I've been a PM at Google, Flipkart, and other tech companies for over 12 years. This is PM Up Level, interview prep for senior level PM roles in India. Subscribe. One video a week, all of it from 12 years of experience interviewing and being interviewed for India PM roles. I spent 4 years at Google as a product manager. I've interviewed and given feedback for dozens of candidates. I know exactly what the interviewer writes down. Before I tell you why most candidates fail this question, let me tell you what you're actually being evaluated on. There is no right answer to these questions. Google is grading four things. First, structure. Can you take an open-ended, messy problem and organize it clearly? Not by rote, by understanding. You don't just apply a framework, you break down the problem in a way that makes sense for this specific question. Second, user empathy. Do you actually understand who the user is and what their real pain is? Not surface level pain, deep specific pain, the kind you'd only find if you listen carefully. Most candidates say generic things like users want better shoes. That's not empathy, that's just restating the question. Third, logical prioritization. Can you make trade off decisions? You have limited resources, you have constraints. Can you say I'm focusing on X, not Y because of Z? And can you justify it? That is senior PM level thinking. And four, creative solutions grounded in what's technically feasible. Can you come up with something non obvious that reframes the problem and still tie it to what the technology can actually do? At Google, especially, a wild idea that ignores reality fails just as hard as a safe, boring one. Most candidates get one or two of these right. The ones who get all four right are the ones Google hires. Here's the split I see while interviewing candidates. Half the candidates go too practical. They nail the framework, segment, pain points, features, metrics. The answer is structured, logical, completely forgettable. The interviewer writes solid execution, zero creative insight. That's a pass, not a hire. The other half go too creative. Moonshot idea, cutting edge technology, disruptive business model, but they never ground it. No consideration of what the technology can actually build or what happens when this needs to work for millions of users. The interviewer writes creative, not realistic, doesn't understand technical feasibility or what scale demands. Also, not a hire. What Google is actually listening for is the bridge. Can you be creative, see something non obvious about the market or the solution while staying grounded in practical constraints? Can you take an open ended problem, structure it clearly, come up with a recommendation, and show you understand what the technology can actually do and what works at scale? Start from the user, not from the revenue. That's senior PM thinking, that's what gets the hire. How would you design a shoe? Here's how I'd answer this in the room. Pay close attention to what I'm about to walk through. This is a framework you can take into any design question, not just this one. It's a modified version of the circles framework, just for your reference. In the room, I'd never name the framework. I'd explain it in a simple language. So I'd say, before I dive in, let me lay out my structure. I'll start by clarifying the problem, stating my assumptions. Then I'll set a goal, segment the users, and pick a segment to focus on, map their pain points, prioritize the pain points, design the solution, and call out the trade offs. Close with metrics. Does that work for you? That does two things. It shows I have a structure, gives the interviewer a chance to redirect me before I spend 10 minutes going the wrong way. Aligning upfront is itself a senior signal. And I'd walk those steps not as a checklist, but as a way to make my thinking transparent, force myself to bridge creativity with practicality. Step 1, clarify. I'd ask, are there any specific constraints I should assume? Budget, timeline, distribution, model, geography. If the interviewer doesn't specify, I'd say, I'll assume that we are a startup with limited capital and no existing distribution operating in India, with a 24-month horizon for product market fit. Does that work or should I adjust? That signals I'm thinking about the problem, not just running through a framework blindly. Step 2, set a goal. Here, I'll make the business context explicit because the goal I pick has to match the stage we are in. We are a startup, we're building a physical product. And one more thing, a startup competing against Nike and Adidas cannot win by doing the same thing slightly better. To survive, the idea has to be genuinely innovative and disruptive. That shapes every decision from here. So, what is the right goal? Brand awareness? Too early. No point building awareness before I know the product works. Market share? Meaningless right now. I'm not competing with Nike yet. Revenue? Downstream. The right goal for a startup at this stage is adoption. Shoes on feet, real customers, people coming back to buy again. That's what proves the product works and funds the next step. I'd say my goal is adoption, acquiring real customers in my target segment. I'll define the segment in the next step and specify the metric once I've designed the solution. Notice I'm not naming the metric yet because I haven't designed the solution. The goal is the business outcome. The metric follows the design, not the other way around. Step 3, user segments. I wouldn't just jump to one segment, I'd start broad and narrow down with reasoning at each level. I'd say a shoe can serve very different users. Let me group them by use case. First, regular users, daily wear for office, school, walking, where comfort and style matter most. Second, fitness and sports users, people who run, train, or play a sport a few times a week and care about performance. Third, professional athletes, people who compete and need elite specialized gear. Now I have 3 segments. I prioritize based on 2 things: size of the segment and fit to the goal I just set, which is adoption as a startup that needs to be disruptive. Then I'd narrow. Professional athletes are a tiny market already locked up by Nike and Adidas sponsorships. So a startup can't win there. Regular daily wear users are a huge market, but it's crowded, low margin, and the pain is mostly style and price, which is hard for a new entrant to differentiate on. The fitness and sports segment is the sweet spot. Real performance pain, willingness to pay, and underserved by the giants who chase either pros or mass volume. So I'll focus there. Then I'd narrow one more level. Within fitness and sports, I'll pick running specifically because it's the largest single activity and has the clearest, most measurable performance pain. And within runners, the serious amateur, the intermediate runner doing 30 to 80 kilometers a week with a budget of 6,000 rupees to 12,000 rupees is exactly who the big brands ignore. That's my segment. Now the interviewer has seen me start broad, make a reasoned call at every level, not just a certain answer. Step 4, user needs and pain points. Again, I wouldn't just name 2 pain points. I'd walk the journey, then prioritize. I'd say, let me trace the intermediate runner's journey. First, they choose a shoe. Then they buy it. Then they run it over months. Then eventually they replace it. At each step, there is friction. Choosing, there are multiple models. They can't evaluate foam density or heel to toe drop. So it's analysis paralysis. Buying, they're never sure it'll fit their gait. Running, this is the big one. They have no idea if the shoe is actually helping their performance or quietly causing an injury. Replacing, they swap shoes blindly every 800 kilometers because that's the rule of thumb with no real signal. Now I have 4 pain points, and this is how I prioritize. Based on the frequency of the pain point, how severe it is when it hits, and whether solving it directly impacts my goal. Choice overload, high severity, it blocks the purchase entirely, but low frequency, it only hits during the buying decision. Still, it's directly relevant to my goal of adoption, so I can't ignore it. The feedback gap, high frequency runners feel it on every single run. Medium severity, and if I solve it well, it could drive word of mouth for the product. So those are the 2 I'll design for. That's user empathy plus prioritization, not just a list. Step 5, solutions. I build directly from the pain diagnosis, starting from the user outcome, not the technology. Imagine the customer never had to evaluate foam density or heel to toe drop at all, but still got exactly the shoe their body needs. What would that look like? It starts with a gait analysis, a short run on a treadmill, or a phone camera capturing their stride. The system reads how they move, recommends the right foam, the right drop, the right sole, and explains why. Not choose your cushioning level. Instead, based on your heel strike and the distances you're running, here's what your foot actually needs. And here are the 2 options within that. The user understands the system's recommendation, makes an informed call, and approves the product before it ships. Choice eliminated, confidence built. Now, the feedback gap. Imagine a runner knowing after every run whether their shoe is helping their performance or quietly causing damage. Real data, not a rule of thumb. That's sensors tracking durability and leg movement in real time with Gen AI telling them if the shoe is working for them or working against them. That's problem 2 solved. Every solution grows directly from the pain. And right here on top of the solution is where I'd layer the creative insight because the moonshot should grow out of the product I just designed, not just get bolted on at the end. I'd say here's where I think the real opportunity sits. The shoe is the entry point, but the real business is the data those sensors generate. After 12 months at scale with 10,000 to 50,000 runners logging biomechanics data, I own something nobody else has. Ground truth on how gait plus shoe characteristics plus training load correlate to injury and performance. Brands like Nike can copy my shoe design. They can't copy 50,000 runners' gait signatures and 2 years of wear patterns. That's the moat. Year 1 and 2, shoes drive 40% margins. Year 3 and beyond, I license that dataset to shoe brands for R&D, to coaching platforms for training algorithms, to sports medicines for research. Licensing at 80% margins. That's how I turn a 5 crore seed into a 500 crore exit. The creative leap grows directly out of the sensors I already put in the product. It's not just a random new idea. Step 6 trade offs. I'd call them out directly. I'm choosing premium pricing at Rs 6,000 to 12,000 instead of competing on volume. Custom assembly adds cost instead of speed. Sensor durability is a real risk. Hundreds of kilometers of impact, sweat, water exposure wear the sensor down over time. So I need a sealed, ruggedized housing before this ships, which adds hardware cost and time I'm choosing to spend upfront rather than patch later. I am betting on the data play, which means I have to nail privacy and earn trust before anyone shares their biomechanics. But for a startup, unit economics beat volume. I dominate a niche first, then expand. That's logical prioritization. I am not hedging, I'm choosing. Step 7 metrics. I close by tying this straight back to the goal I set in step 2 adoption, acquiring real customers. So I'd say North Star is monthly unit sales in my target segment. That's the direct measure of whether adoption is actually happening, and every unit sold is also runner generating wear data for the data business I laid out earlier. Guardrail is support tickets per 1,000 units, so I know I'm not buying growth at the cost of quality. Every metric here traces back to the goal, nothing measured for its own sake. That's the full answer. And here's what I want you to take away from the structure I just used. This is a 7-step framework I use for every design question, regardless of what they ask me to design. The steps don't change. What I change is where I spend time. I read the interviewer signals and go deeper on whatever they probe. If they push on segmentation, I slow down there. If they want to get to solutions faster, I compress the journey. The framework gives me the spine. The interviewer tells me where the weight should go. And notice through all of this, I'm still grounded in reality. Manufacturing complexity, supply chain risks, sensor durability in wet conditions, data privacy. I've thought through the practical constraints. The structure I used forced me to think through both the creative insight and the practical reality. That's how I bridge both. If you take away one thing from this video, it's this. The bridge between creative and practical is creativity grounded in what the technology can actually do. That's what Google is really testing. They don't want a wild idea that ignores reality, and they don't want a safe idea that any competent PM could give. They want a creative leap that's feasible, where you can point to the technology, the build path, and what happens at scale, and say this is hard, but it's real. My data moat only lands because the sensors that make it possible are already in the product, and the licensing economics actually work. Creative but grounded. That's the bar. So when you answer, structure your thinking, make a clear recommendation, take the creative leap, but always tie it back to feasibility. When the interviewer can follow your logic, from clarifying assumptions all the way to a creative insight, grounded in what's actually buildable, that's the moment they stop taking notes and start imagining you in their product org. That's the moment the debrief becomes strong hire. In the comments, tell me when you prep for product design questions, do you lean too practical or too creative? Where's your gap? And which design question are you prepping for right now? Shoe, app, or a feature? Tell me and I'll break down how to bridge both worlds on your specific case. Subscribe to PM Up Level, one video a week straight from 12 years of experience on both sides of the table.